Hi, we continue in 2 Samuel 13 today after 2 full years has passed, as you can see there on the left side of the screen, and the focus is now on Absalom. And as we continue here, before we get into our passage, just a few things to get us up to speed on this chapter and how it fits with the preceding and following chapters. So we've been going over, since we began chapter 13 here, some of these questions. And today, as you can see on the right side of the screen, a couple of the questions we need to look at and just wonder about is where are the other brothers during the 2 years that begin this section here? And then we'll see a little later on, not on today's video, why does David yearn for Absalom if that's what he does? And we'll see that at the very end of the chapter. We've also been noting parallels between our chapters currently 13 and 14 and the preceding ones 11 and 12, and we see that specifically here in our section here where Absalom's plot to commit murder via his servants is parallel to what David did to Uriah back there, and similarly a response in the previous chapters from Nathan sent to David, who offers him a little allegorical story. And we'll see a similar thing here when Joab fetches the wise woman of Tekoa, and she tells him a similar story. And so we'll see how these track very closely, as we can see in those two chapters. We're also looking at parallels between the two chapters here, and today the theme is that both of them end with an Absalom aftermath. And that's really what's going on here. We're setting up at the beginning of chapter 13, really what follows us all the way through chapter 19 is this rivalry between two potential kings, David and his son Absalom. We've also been looking here, and we'll see it especially here, at the many echoes of Genesis. And we can see down here, as Absalom gathered sheep shearers, so did Laban and so did Judah. And all of these involve deception, and gathering sheep shearers is rare outside these three passages in the Hebrew Scriptures, we'll see. So certainly parallel there. And then they will follow with David, who offers a lame excuse for not going with Absalom, who he fears, parallel to Jacob doing the same thing with Esau. And then we see also Dinah's full brother Absalom seeks violent revenge against the rapist. I'm sorry, this is right. That's Tamar here, and this is exactly the opposite. Dinah's full brothers. I'll correct that for radicalbible.net. Sorry, I got those backwards here. And so we see all those parallels, and we have to wonder what's going on there in the authors of Genesis later than the books of Samuel to be making these parallels. And we'll explore some of that as we look at the question of David's motivations. And as I've been pointing out in the last few videos, David seems naive and innocent and ignorant of what's going on here, and yet that's so different than the character of David we've seen throughout, who is always sharp and alert and one step ahead of so many people like Saul and Nabal, as we've seen. So we have to make decisions about the character of David in this section and what follows based on much dialogue and statements that are ambiguous and multi-directional and maybe deceptive, and so it's really tricky to try to figure out. But the question we have to face is David suddenly just unaware of what's going on, or is he very aware of it and crafting a plot that's beneath the surface of the story? So we'll see more of that as we go. Our immediate story echoes a series of fratricides and other brotherly murders, and of course the story in chapter 14 that Joab apparently puts in the mouth of the wise woman of Tekoa is very much like Cain and Abel, a story of fratricide. So we've seen these before, and now we're on this one, but we're also going to see that this ends with the rebellious Absalom killed by Joab, but we're going to see some more killings as we go, including the brother Adonijah by Solomon as we go. So as we look at the shape of our passage here, and I've reposted this at radicalbible.net because as so often is the case as I look closer and explore the immediate passage I'm doing the video on, like here today, a few more verbal changes from the new RSV are placed in here. So this is the most current one, and that's the one that's posted at radicalbible.net. So we start right here, and as we can see, this section is a very nice chiasm, although the previous section that we looked at is a chiasm in many levels, as I took from Falkelman. For whatever reason, no scholars seem to have set this out as a chiasm, but it seems very clear. The 2 full years at the beginning, the 3 years at the end. The repeated emphasis on the king's sons throughout, and especially in this section here, and this initial paragraph where Absalom and the king have a discussion about the king's sons, and then later Jonadab and the king have a discussion about the king's sons, and the incident here is in the middle when the report comes. And so a plainly tight chiasm there, and the passage of all this time. as we'll see when we get through chapter 14, 9 years pass from the rape to the rebellion. And so one of those questions is David really so naive that for 9 long years he doesn't know what's going on? And readers have to decide that for ourselves as we go. So, after these 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor. It's only mentioned here in the Hebrew scripture, but it's right here on the map in the territory of Ephraim. That's not near where he will go later, as we'll see when he goes and stays with his grandfather at the end of this. That's another element that should make David suspicious, that Absalom is reverting to the family lines of power rather than the inherited lines of power through his father. So we'll see more of that as we go. So Baal Hazor near Ephraim here. And Ephraim invokes many key elements forward and backward. So if we look at this chart on the right side of the screen, we can see how Ephraim is played out in 1st and 2nd Samuel, but also in other selected places in the Deuteronomistic history, the texts that go from Joshua to 2 Kings. So we see back in the Joshua, the description of Ephraim is simply the hill country of Ephraim, a territory there. And then in Judges 1 you said Deborah used to sit between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. Ramah being the home of Samuel, and Bethel being the disputed, from the Jerusalem-centered perspective that we'll see later in the monarchy under the time of Josiah, the place where Jacob had his vision of the ascending and descending angels, and where Jeroboam will set up one of his alternative worship spots to Jerusalem, to Solomon's temple. So we'll see that there. We saw back here the beginning of a Zophite from the hill country of Ephraim named Elkanah, who's the father of Samuel. And then we see here that Samuel and Saul and his companions are passing through looking for donkeys in the hill country of Ephraim. And then we saw it here again a few chapters later when the Israelites had gone into hiding in the hill country of Ephraim. Now in 2 Samuel we saw that Ephraim became one of the places that Abner made David king of here in the beginning in Hebron. And then we have our later passage here that the army went out and fought in the forest of Ephraim, and that's where Absalom will end up dying. Then there'll be a man from the hill country of Ephraim called Sheba who will go up against David. And then finally the reference that I was noting above to Jeroboam. So Ephraim plays an important part, and readers are certainly expected to have the various echoes of Ephraim in mind, that where Absalom goes to begin to plot his revenge against Amnon. Notice also throughout the different ways that people are referred to. The narrator refers to the king's sons, and we see king's sons throughout. But Absalom will not call them that. He will refer to them as your servants, for talking to his father, as if he wasn't his son, as if he was just speaking abstractly to the king as somebody else. And we'll also see that the word for servants here, the normal word, I don't have it in the Hebrew there, but the normal word for slaves, and I've translated them that way as slaves in most of these situations, later becomes a different word, na'ar, for young man or lads. And so we'll see how that plays out as we go as well. The 2 years, after the 2 years, he has these sheep shearers, and Absalom came to the king. Notice, not to his father. There's no sense that Absalom calls him his father. And this is the first conversation they have face to face. He's speaking of himself in the third person, and the Norse, as always does, omits henna, the Hebrew for behold, and so I've included those here. Behold, please, and we'll see several pleases, 2 pleases in the same sentence, and a whole series of beholds later. So speaking of himself in the third person, your slave or your servant is sheep shearers. Will the king, speaking also to the person he's talking to in the third person, and his servants, please go with your servant. The word for slave 3 times there in the verse, all about enslavement. What are we supposed to hear there? Well, certainly that the king is dominant over other people. But then we hear this response, and this is one of the many double-voiced elements here where we're not sure exactly what the motivation is. Let's listen. So the king said to Absalom, "No, my son," and he refers to him as my son here, and we'll hear that at the very end when he laments over the dead, Absalom, my son, Absalom, at the very end. But after this, he is not. So, my son, let us not all go, or else we will be burdensome, literally heavy or glorious, using the word kabod. And certainly they won't be glorious to them, but heavy in that sense of a burden. But why would it be? Why would the king suggest that the family of Absalom would be a burden at sheep shearing? Certainly it wouldn't be. So this is a BS excuse, and Absalom plainly knows it, and readers plainly know it. It's one of those clear examples where David is plainly not saying what he means. But why does he want to avoid Absalom? And that's one of the questions throughout. Does he already know that Absalom is plotting and he wants to let it happen so that he can get him killed without looking like he's responsible for killing his own son? Is he really naive? If he's really naive, then why would he refuse to go? He must know something, but he's holding it close to his vest, and we only can guess. So Absalom pressed him, and the word we hear again in verse 27, it's twice here, literally peretz, to break down or break through, as the child named that in the end of the book of Ruth, peretz, and one of the ancestors, in fact, of David. So he pressed against him, but he would not go, but blessed him. And it's interesting here that David rarely is seen as blessing people, and this is certainly a paternal blessing parallel to Isaac's to Jacob back in Genesis. But as we saw in the Genesis series, that ultimately was meaningless because the only real blessing is that from Yahweh. So is this meant to be a blessing, or is it meant to say, you go about your business and I hope it goes well, not in the formal sense of blessing? But Absalom's not done yet, and let's go down a couple more verses so we can see where this is going. As my note below has, as with Uriah, Joab, and David, there's the question of knowledge in the plot to kill. And that's going over what I just been saying. So Absalom continues, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And that's the only time he refers to them that way. And we know that Amnon is his half-brother. And we refer to Tamar as Absalom's sister and Absalom as her brother, but he's not taken Amnon as his brother otherwise. So there it is, trying to appeal to that as if they're buddies. And yet David obviously knows that Amnon has raped Tamar, and he knows in the 2 years that have gone by that Absalom is waiting to get revenge. It's none of this is said, but certainly we have to attribute that kind of knowledge to David. He can't possibly be that ignorant after all this time. And after all, Tamar is staying in Absalom's house, not in her father David's house. So all of that is pretty clear. So the king said to him, why should he go with you? And is that a rhetorical question or is it a real question? Is David really asking Absalom why he wants Amnon to go with him? Or is it simply a rhetorical one? But we don't hear engagement of that question. Instead, the narrator jumps in and the dialogue directly ends. Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. And we don't know what persuaded him of why David would be willing to change his mind. In the end, they won't really talk again, except for a brief moment here. So Absalom pressed him and all the king's sons. And so not Absalom's brothers, but the king's sons, highlighting that element throughout here. And that's where we have to wonder, where have they been? And the king's sons, of course, include Solomon and Adonijah, the two who will fight for the succession later after Absalom is dead at the end of this book in the beginning of 1 Kings. And what about the others? As I was noting at the beginning of this unit, Absalom is not the immediate successor. If we're talking about the order of birth, there's Chileab, but we don't see anything about Chileab ever mentioned. And could they be so naive? Could all these king's sons really not understand what Absalom and Amnon have been through and what this is all about? But they seem to be. They don't have any direct role here, and they don't speak at all other than to flee and be afraid. So Absalom made a feast like a king's feast. This is from the Septuagint, not the Masoretic text. So it's being added from the Greek there. And yet what it provides for us here is the first explicit link of Absalom's desire for the throne. And it's parallel, as we see below in 1 Samuel 25:36, to the kingly feast that Nabal put on there that got him drunk and led to his death. So two feasts that lead to death. And now comes the key to the situation here. So then Absalom commanded his servants, watch when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, as David tried to manipulate the drunken Uriah, but unsuccessfully there. And when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. And we have to wonder about the servants here. They work for Absalom, although we don't know exactly what the situation is. Do all the king's sons have their own cadre of servants? Are these people he's gathered like David gathered people among the disgruntled all along? Are they being paid for by the royal coffers? We know nothing about these people and why they should be loyal to Absalom when he calls for them to kill his brother. And unlike Cain, he won't do it himself, but he has the servants do it for them. And we don't hear any objection to them, but he does certainly try to buoy them up with what follows here. Do not be afraid. Have I not myself commanded you? Be courageous and valiant. Echoing 10:12, which we can go back to here. Be strong and be courageous for the sake of our people, sending Joab into battle there. And we'll see that later in chapter 17 as well. The phrase for be valiant there is livnei chayil, literally to be a son of power. So is that about Absalom, or is it about them to be a son of power? But with no objection, they do it. They do it right here, as we see. As Falcom notes, Amnon has become a pure object, an object of actions, just as he treated Tamar. So with no ado and no details, we don't know where exactly it happens at this party, how the servants got in there, whether there was any defense or anybody tried to protect Amnon. It all just happens like this. So the servants of Absalom did do Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Notice it doesn't say he was dead. It doesn't say they killed him. It just uses this passive kind of language to say they fulfilled the command of their boss Absalom. But we don't hear the direct statement that Amnon is dead. Then all the king's sons rose, and each mounted his mule and fled. As Falcom notes, here lurks a light irony in the princes having used their mounts, a symbol of their status in such a way, and it also echoes anticipates what we see down below in 2 Samuel 18:9, where we hear the mule 3 times in one verse that Absalom is on, that slips out from under him as his hair gets caught in the tree, and then he'll be killed there. So that's where we'll stop for now at the end of the first part of the chiasm, and next time we'll take up the report and how Jonadab, the friend of Amnon, comes back in, and we'll have to wonder which side exactly is Jonadab on. To be continued next time. See you then. Bye-bye.